And warm up from the hello! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends in Tristan Freeman. He does such an amazing job over at Boston Brackets, along with Sleepers Media, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. I know he's been making some appearances as well with the Field of 68 newsletter as well, so we're going to be chatting with him about something I've been touching upon the last few days in college basketball. One of the toughest things for me, and I know so many of you out there, in terms of being able to gauge this great sport, is the guys that we haven't seen play college basketball yet. Being able to gauge these junior college transfers, being able to gauge these guys that are coming in as freshmen. We're going to be chatting with him about how he's been taking a look at things. Some of the mid-major teams are going to be able to benefit from getting some of these, shall we say, diamonds in the rough, these guys that are not transfers, because in this day and age, teams are looking to get older and older in college basketball. So we're going to be chatting with him about gauging these mid-major conferences, them being able to get some recruits that maybe they didn't get in the past, gauging freshmen, gauging junior college transfers. And there's a school out there in the ACC that our good friend Tristan is feeling bullish about. We'll be chatting with him about that and so much more. And then we've got ourselves a great two-part chat. We've got more conference previews on the way as well. We're going to be getting those for you next week. I think that we've done 5 over the last 12 or so days. So we're going to keep those coming as well. Just all about getting guests and being able to give you guys some good insight on those. So expect those moving forward, and a lot of two-part conversations as the news and notes in college basketball relatively done. These rosters are relatively set in stone, and if you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to throw those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Lars ZM, the me does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While we did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds anywhere and at any time. EdgeBoost is making sure that you get rewarded for utilizing their service with regards to all of your gambling related transactions as well. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, Greg. That's going to get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with Tristan, who you're able to follow on the old Twitter/X at Oops351. Does such an amazing job taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, this is something that I always have a little bit of a difficult time with prior to every season, but especially in this day and age now that we've got the COVID years running out, what have you, how do you gauge freshmen? And do you think that we might see a few more impactful freshmen this year than in past years, with a lot of these guys no longer having their COVID year, and now you have more of a, shall we say, more traditional style of college basketball with the true 4 years?
Yeah, the COVID year gave us a bunch of fifth-year seniors with experience and who obviously all got better. And that was something that we haven't had before that era. And obviously affected freshmen because, as we know, coaches are always going to play the ones that they trust, what is going to be the seniors compared to the freshmen. So now that they're all gone, there's more opportunities for all the freshmen. And we'll still see, a share of international guys who tend to be older, and that could possibly affect freshmen. But in general, there always will be the 5 stars because their talent's going to get them on the court immediately. But now we're going to see a lot of more 4-star guys, being 3-star players from the lower level teams on the high majors and obviously the mid majors, that they're not going to get an opportunity. And it'll change the fortunes of, teams, ones that we didn't think were going to be that good, had a freshman seemingly come out of nowhere and was able to make them much more competitive.
And do you think that sort of the, shall we say, roundabout teams that might be able to benefit a little bit more from this landscape might actually be mid-majors? Because as we know, the 5-star guys are still going to be going to your top places like your Dukes, your North Carolinas, into your favorite power school here. Obviously, BYU doing a solid job with this regard as well. But I do feel like more of these, shall we say, fringe top 150, fringe top 200 guys, they've decided to go to more like the Atlantic 10 and smaller schools and chase a playing time rather than riding the bench behind a whole bunch of 5-star guys and a whole bunch of transfers at a power conference.
We still see the high majors get their fair share of top 100 guys, because if you're a top 100 player, then you're probably going to be good enough to get minutes. However, whether it's large enough in year one will remain to be seen. But the smaller leagues are always going to have to find ways of getting talent. And we are seeing some guys in the 2026 class make that move. I think Sammy Jackson, the top 100 guy who's going to VCU, there was a notable piece about why he did that. And one of the things that was mentioned was that revenue sharing allows the non-football based schools to sort of have more finances to give to some of those guys, and we're seeing that. Louisiana is another team that's been getting prospects from down south who's 4-star rated out of the Sun Belt. So we are seeing some more of them, and then it'll be interesting because you assume that if those guys play well out of the gate, they'll be hot commodities, assuming they enter the transfer portal.
Yep, no question about it. And I do think that that's going to be an interesting landscape for more of these fringe guys because I do think that it's going to be a little bit of a more difficult decision for someone that's maybe like a number 215 prospect and a number 220 prospect as to whether or not they want to ride the bench year number one, year number two at a power conference versus being able to play right away, as you mentioned, at a place like VCU. Even if you go a little bit further down the line, like the Big West has been able to bring in some top 250 transfers, and I do some top 250 recruits. I think that that's becoming a little bit more prevalent in college basketball than it was even a few short years ago. And I even take a look at a team like St. Mary's bringing in some good freshmen for this upcoming season too.
And ultimately, again, you're going to have to find ways to get talent, not just high school, but also JUCO, again, international. We've seen schools such as St. Mary's get that kind of success, which is why they've been able to compete with Gonzaga, because obviously they're not going to get the top 50, top 100 consistently type players, or even the top transfers. They had to get transfers who weren't super great at the power conference level, but moved down and was able to benefit from them. So yeah, St. Mary's is a really good example of just finding players who not only fit your style of play, but sort of guys who flew under the radar enough to where teams like Gonzaga didn't want to get them.
Yep, no question about it. I think that that's going to be interesting to look at moving forward as we do have our good friend Tristan Freeman of Bus and Brackets joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I know that you, Tristan, do a great job out there in the Pittsburgh area, so you deal with a pair of conferences that they do bring quite a few junior college / JUCO guys. I've really noticed Horizon League this offseason has brought in a lot of junior college guys, as Oakland is one of those teams that really dove in deep. I know that they brought in, at the very least, a pair of guys that, according to JUCOrecruiting.com, were in the top 50. UW Green Bay bringing in LeBron Thomas was a relatively good ad for them. I know that Robert Morris has a guy or two from the non-D1 ranks that are going to be coming in as well. And how do you sort of gauge this landscape as well? Because I feel like this is another avenue that a lot of these smaller schools are looking at, and we have seen a few of the power conference teams really stick their toe in there. Like I know that Auburn, when Chad Baker Mazar was down at the junior college level, they brought him in. That worked out very well. Someone like Tyler Bird for this upcoming season is going to be heading to Alabama, but I do think that it's really interesting to take a look at the junior college market and the teams that have really been embracing these JUCO guys and have really reaped the benefits of it.
Yeah, you mentioned Auburn with Baker Mazzaro. They also landed arguably the top transfer in the class with, Abdul Bashir, whose brother was a player for Monmouth who averaged 20 points a game transfer. So the Horizon League definitely got a lot of JUCOs. I mean, Oregon was able to land Isaac Garrett, and I believe that they had to beat out the likes of Florida State for services. So that was a big pickup for the Golden Grizzlies and the conference. And yeah, I think JUCOs were obviously going to be hurt due to the fact that, again, you had all the COVID seniors. So that sort of, took spots away from them. But a lot of those guys who ended up going, I guess, to a different level to sort of improve their skills coming back up to D1. And you mentioned the other examples of guys who have worked out for it. And there's going to be another batch as well. And now there's more opportunities for those types of players, especially considering that the mid-majors, many of them lost all their top talent. And one of the best way to get ready now players, instead of freshmen who's going to have to go through growing pains, is going through the JUCO circuit.
And how big of an impact do you think that it is for the junior college ranks that they did redo the rules a little bit, because now you can go down to the junior college level and still have a little bit more eligibility than you did just a few short years ago as well? And I think that that could be a big help for some of these guys looking to be able to get some playing time and don't necessarily want to ride the bench at a place where they might be able to get a little bit more NIL, but they can showcase themselves and still be in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of players are just looking to find places where they're going to want to play. I think guys willingly being, a 10th or 11th man on the bench, knowing that 99% of coaches play a 7, 8 man rotation anyways, they're looking to places. And that also goes to why a lot of freshmen are willing to look differently at the mid-major team just to get on the court. Ultimately, especially now in these days where players can now transfer after each year, the best way to raise your profile and then what would be your with the price to get you is by being on the floor and producing while out there. Because otherwise, if you're just getting 10 minutes a game, then you're not going to have many options if you opt to go into the portal in the offseason.
Yep, no question about it. And I think that that's a changing landscape that we're seeing in college basketball right now, as we do have our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I want to talk with Tristan on the flip side about how he is taking a look at some of these teams. Now that there's a lot more known commodities, now that we don't have any more like roster turnover or anything like that, how he's taking a look at some of these teams, and we'll be discussing some of the teams that he's starting to feel a little bit more bullish/bearish on than he did perhaps at the beginning part of the offseason. That's coming up right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now a part of the Beats and Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hughes Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Tristan Freeman, who does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at HoopsNut351, as he's doing such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. And Tristan, we left off by talking about some of these freshmen, some of these junior college guys, but now we relatively know what we're going to be getting out of these teams because schedules are set and rosters, for the most part, they are set as well. You don't have a lot of guys lingering in the transfer portal or anything like that. So I do want to pose this question to you. How do you take a look at things now in late July, early August in terms of making evaluations on teams? And are there cases where perhaps you do adjust your evaluation of a team from the beginning part of the offseason to now that we know what we're getting a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately going to be a guessing game until you see them on the floor. I mean, especially with JUCOs, there are some that end up becoming stars, like of course Chris Duarte, who was the Pac-12 Player of the Year at Oregon a few years ago, and there are other guys who they can barely get on the floor. I mean, Pitt's an example where you had a guy in Federico, who was a former West Virginia commit. There wasn't a lot of expectations for him, but he ended up overtaking, John Hughley, who was supposed to be the team's best player coming in. He ended up taking his spot at the center position, and now he was one of the top centers in the portal now at Texas A&M. So you never know which is going to be stars that come out of JUCO ranks, but especially in Federico's case, it came down to opportunity. He got an opportunity because Hughley was hurt. He played well in his absence, and it's parlayed him into millions of dollars, and now 3 different power conference programs where he was able to get minutes at.
Yep, absolutely. And it's been interesting to take a look at the landscape of college basketball. So many guys moving from team to team, because I do look at a guy like an AJ Storr, I think is a prime example of it. He go all the way back to his high school days. He's going to be on school number 8 in 8 years when he suits it up for Ole Miss. And how do we take a look at some of these guys as well? Because I do think that 2 things can be true. There are a lot of guys that they move up the list. Like you just mentioned, Abdi Bashir, a guy that was averaging 20 points per game over at Monmouth. Now he's going to be playing at the power conference level, and that's obviously massive for him. But at the same time, too, you've got guys like an AJ Storr that they just bounce around from place to place to place. And other than that year at Wisconsin that Storr had, doesn't feel like he's ever really truly found a, shall we say, set home.
He technically found a home when he went from St. John's to Wisconsin. I mean, I think he left St. John's because of the coaching change. He was a star at Wisconsin, and then, wanted to, take a chance by going to Kansas, and it didn't work. I mean, some players, they need time to fully gel in the system. Some systems may either be complicated or they may fit certain guys. And then there's a lot of situations for teams where, you bring in a bunch of players and you have a free-for-all, and where, whoever becomes the go-to guys, that's it, and the others have to take a backseat role. And that's probably what happened at Kansas that didn't work for him. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors go into why certain players don't necessarily succeed. I mean, there are guys who can go from team to team and be perfectly fine. I mean, Keyshawn Hall is a guy who, no matter where he goes, UNLV, George Mason, UCF, he just continues to get better and better, and he could be a candidate for SEC Player of the Year at Auburn. Or he could, struggle because maybe Auburn's system and style may not be a good fit for him. So, again, it's all unknowns until we get out there on the floor. The only true knowns, so to speak, are the Brayton Smiths of the world and guys who have been at the teams for multiple years, because it's going to be the same thing with them. There's not going to be as many unknowns or question marks I'm talking about.
Yep, and I do want to touch upon that with you as well because you're out there doing a great job covering everything out there in the Pittsburgh area. So you get to deal with the Atlantic 10 where we've got a lot of good transfers that are coming in the Atlantic 10, but you do have a few teams that have some good camaraderie. Like George Washington, I thought was a great example of a team that they were able to maintain some of their own, but at the same time, they did a really good job of being able to hit the transfer portal, being able to bring in some great talent. I take a look at a team like St. Louis. They're going to be bringing back a lot of guys from a season ago. I know that St. Joseph loses a few of those key pieces, but they bring back quite a bit, and Duquesne as well. How do we take a look at some of these teams? Like, I think a Duquesne is a good example. A team that struggled a little bit last year, but they showed some promise towards back half of the season. They return over 50% of their minutes from a season ago. I think that these teams are very intriguing to look at as to how big that jump could be from one year to the next.
So teams are bad teams who return a lot of production and they may not get better. There are also teams who had, younger players who are expected to take larger leaps. You mentioned Duquesne, they're a team who brings back several role players and also had a couple of guys who were injured last year. It'll come down to whether or not the newcomers, sort of fits with them. I think they have a lot of guys who are part of the rotation, but do they have any all-league players? If they don't, then it's probably going to ultimately doom them to finish between 7th and 10th again. But if any of them can break out and become stars, then that's what's going to do it for them. That's why George Washington is a team that people are talking about, because they brought back their star player in Rafael Castro, who is one of the top bigs in the league, and he's going to be a player of the year candidate. And you bring back a few rotation guards and add some players from the portal, including Duquesne transfer Trey Dinkins. Now all of a sudden they could be a team that can compete for a title, although ultimately come down to what VCU and Dayton, the perennial favorites, what they do with their new cast of transfer players, because a lot of them have upside, but may not necessarily be proven yet as go-to guys.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that there's a lot of upside with many teams out there in the Atlantic 10. Certainly Duquesne is one of them. We've already touched upon VCU, the fact that they've brought in a lot of talent here in the offseason. They did a great job with the coaching change, bringing in Phil Martelli Jr., the other George Mason under Tony Skinn and company. Feeling very bullish about some of those teams, as Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Busted Brackets, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and did ask you a little bit earlier about how you just gauge some of these teams now that we have a few known commodities, now that we know what the rosters are going to be, what have you. And just as you've been researching, have there been a few teams over the last month or two that you just are feeling a little bit better about than you did towards the beginning part of the offseason, and you're starting to feel like they might be able to exceed expectations this season?
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech is a team I'm starting to get more interest in, mainly because of the freshman forward from Greece. The freshman for them, who's like a top international recruit, he's had an excellent time at the under-19 Euros Championships, where he was one of their best players. Nikos Ividas. I'll probably mess it up. Apologies for that, but
close enough.
He could be one of the best players in the ACC. And they bring back Toby Lawal, who was already one of the top bigs in the ACC, and you pair him with West Virginia transfer Amari Hansberry, and they got a solid incoming recruiting class. It'll come down to how good the guards are. But again, if Avidalis is good enough out the gate, and he can be a potential all-elite kind of player, then all of a sudden Virginia Tech could have NCAA tournament aspirations.
Yep, absolutely. And with Virginia Tech, it has been a program that has fallen on some tough times recently, but Mike Young is a guy that I have just belief in general. And how much do you think that the key is for Virginia Tech just being able to hunker down on defense? Because offense year in and year out, other than last year when, things just got completely sabotaged with Heisier Miller, the projected point guard, not being out there. So they had to try to pretty much mix and match with regards to that point guard spot, and that completely threw things offline. But how big of a key do you think that it is for Virginia Tech just to be able to have the international man of mystery, give this team a little bit more on the defensive side of things? Because I think that that's really been the missing ingredient for Virginia Tech over the last few years.
Yeah, they've been able to score. Last year's team wasn't very good at scoring, which is why they weren't postseason contender. But, defense has been what has prevented them from taking the lead. And ultimately, on paper, I do think that they can be good defensively in the front court. But again, in the backcourt, that's going to be where they're going to need to find key guys. I mean, Isaiah Pasha, who's another transfer major ranks, is someone who's a really good athlete. If he can defend at the ACC level, that'll be big for them. They're going to have to be good enough on both ends to pull off a couple upsets if they want to be taken seriously as a team that can finish in the top half of the league.
Yep, I'm right there with you. It's going to be interesting to see what we get from those middle teams in the ACC. Virginia Tech, I certainly think is one of them, but they could be able to rise up this season. But a man that always rises to the top with the way that he covers college basketball and just does a great job all 12 months out of the year of being able to stick with it, be able to decipher these teams. That'd be you, Tristan. Let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at hoopsnut351 on Twitter/X, and also follow me at Blue Sky if you have that account as well. And we're at the 100-day mark, which means we're just ever so closer to the start of the season.
We are inching our way to the start of actual games. I need it in my life because, man, there's nothing better than being able to gauge like 100 billion college basketball games on a Saturday. I know that Tristan loves it as well, and he does such a great job of being able to cover this game. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So, I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.